Today, I'm going to take a look at a pretty impressive looking sim racing product, the Asetek Forte Formula wheel. This wheel is a pure Formula style sim racing wheel that you can see has taken a lot of inspiration from real world steering wheels. It's quickly become one of our favourite sim racing wheels that we have in the studio, and in this review I'm going to tell you why, along with some quirks and things that I'm maybe not so keen on. But before I do dive into the design and the performance of this Asetek steering wheel, I want to disclose that this wheel was sent to me for review by the guys at Asetek, but with all of our reviews this does not impact the outcome in any way whatsoever. So let's start by taking a very quick look at just who Asetek Sim Sports actually are, because until recently many sim racers may never have heard of them. Asetek may seem relatively new in the sim racing space, however, this Danish company have been producing some of the best gaming hardware over the past 20 years. While the Forte wheel is the company's first sim racing steering wheel, many gamers may have already been using Asetek products in their PCs without ever really knowing it. Before delving into sim racing, Asetek specialised in producing some of the best liquid cooling systems in the market, and then in 2021 they jumped into sim racing with the launch of a selection of sim racing pedals. You may have seen some videos with the uber cool looking Pulgani Huara sim racing pedals around, and these are actually Asetek pedals, as are the hardcore Invicta pedals. Both of these sets use hydraulic pistons and both are the real deal. So as you can imagine, this impressive history had me incredibly excited when I got my hands on the Asetek Forte wheel and wheelbase. But you may be wondering where this Forte Formula wheel sits in the sim racing space. Does it occupy the budget area, or is this Forte wheel going to be astronomically expensive like some sim racing wheels we've seen? Well, it hovers right around the middle ground. It certainly isn't cheap at $650 or just under €550, but it certainly doesn't stretch into the realms of having to sell your dog and remortgage your house just to afford it. This price range is about spot on for this level of sim racing wheel, and while I'd always be happier to see this sort of product a little bit cheaper, if Asetek did lower the price, then some of the functionality that makes this wheel great would need to be cut. So looking at the design of the wheel itself, it has a slightly unique shape with a rather large dip in the middle and raised corners. And I have to say, I wasn't really a fan of this design choice initially. You can really see the resemblance to the Williams F1 steering wheel, and I do understand the choice for this central dip. In theory, it allows you to see a screen if you've got one mounted to your wheelbase, or you'll have a slightly less obstructed view of your monitor. But the problem is with where the steering wheel mounts to the wheelbase, both the quick release handle and the wheelbase itself are the only things you get a better view of. Unless you mount your wheelbase at a really extreme angle, this central dip won't increase visibility at all. This leads me to believe that a straighter top edge design would have looked slightly more appealing, well, to me anyway. Now you may be thinking why I'm talking about this dip a little too much and making too much of a big deal out of it, but really the only reason I'm doing this is because there really isn't too much else about the design of the Forte wheel that I dislike. Across the rest of the wheel, everything's incredibly well considered, and quite frankly I really like it. So let's jump into a quick list of 5 things I love about this Asetek wheel. First, the diameter is spot on, the right size for a Formula wheel at around 290mm. Next, rubber grips on the handles is by far the best choice, much better than Alcantara or leather. Despite not quite looking as nice as both those materials, it feels and performs brilliantly with or without gloves, and wears better over time. Then there's the sheer amount of inputs this wheel offers. You've got 12 push buttons, 3 rotary encoders, 6 thumb encoders and more. And the thumb encoders are positioned just right. The placement on the front of the wheel in the top corners is much better than facing your thumbs in the hand grips themselves. This avoids any accidental knocks when turning the steering wheel. And to round out my top 5 things I love about this Forte wheel, it has to be the quick release. Oh, that quick release is so silky smooth to use, and it's by far the best quick release on any sim racing product to date. But more on that later. So now that we've had a super quick look at my top 5 features on this wheel, let's slow things down a little and take a deeper dive into this wheel and everything it offers. And I'm going to start by looking in depth at the design, the materials used and the wheel's overall build quality. because this stuff really matters when it comes to investing in a product that is going to have to withstand a good amount of punishment. You'll notice when you first look at the wheel that the front faceplate is finished in carbon fibre. This is a 2mm woven carbon, and it adds a really nice reflection and gloss to the front of the wheel. Around the back, the rest of the body in the chassis is constructed from a unique forged carbon injection mould. This looks from a distance to be forged carbon fibre, but you'll notice when you get up close it feels much softer. When you touch it, it feels more like a form of plastic or rubber, and that is due to the combination of carbon, glass and plastic composite that is used in this construction. This injection mould adds a lot of rigidity to the wheel, and you'll certainly notice this during use, or if you undertake the very technical shake test. I mean, you could throw this thing at a wall and I'm sure it would bounce right off. It just feels that sturdy and strong. Although, please don't do that. I don't fancy someone in the comments blaming me for a broken steering wheel. Moving on to the inputs that are on offer here, and you've got a pretty wide selection. Scattered across the carbon faceplate you'll find 12 push buttons, all of which are conveniently located around the thumb grip, with a few slightly further down. During the heat of a race, I had no issues with any of the positions of these buttons, and I could intuitively move my thumb to push an input without ever taking my hand off the wheel. Each button features a blank face with no stickers or predefined labels, which I really dig. So many sim racing wheels come with labels such as DRS or P for pit limiter already printed onto each button, and I really don't like this. This is designed to push sim racers into using the wheel manufacturer's suggested layout. However, most sim racers already have their own preferred layout, and that will almost always be different from the suggested label on each button. The fact that Asetek has chosen not to include any labels on their buttons is a good move. There is a sticker sheet included which lets you put stickers on whichever button you like if you do need a reference, and for me this is the perfect way to go about labelling inputs. The buttons themselves are relatively stiff to engage, which is a good thing if you're prone to accidental button presses. You do need to apply a fair bit of force to activate any of the buttons on this wheel, but not to the extent where any button input feels cumbersome. When you place your thumb on a button, there's a slight bit of movement or wobble, but this is rarely felt while racing, so isn't too much of an issue. While feeling firm to engage, each button press does have an incredibly short throw, which I really like. Next to each and every button on this wheel is a little LED light to help guide your thumb into position. These lights are bright enough to be seen in your peripheral vision, but certainly not bright enough to cause glare in a dark room. You can run through the Race Hub software and customize the color of each button as well to really personalize this wheel. Although the base orange color is without a doubt my favorite, as it works really well with the orange accents that are scattered across the wheel itself. Also on the front of the wheels are 3 front-facing encoders. Each of these protrudes a fair amount from the wheel, making them easy to access. Although one little niggle I had was that I sometimes accidentally leant on either of the 2 joysticks when making an adjustment to an encoder. These joysticks are positioned relatively close to the 2 topmost encoders, leaving only a small gap between them. While wearing thicker racing gloves, this issue was more apparent, but after a bit of use and acclimatization with the wheel, this started to happen less and less. And talking of the joysticks, there are 2 included on this wheel, which is quite often a rarity. Both feature up, down, left and right movements, as well as both being able to be rotated and clicked. They're incredibly useful when controlling your MFD or black box in games like F1 23, ACC or iRacing, and they open up a lot of extra functionality that would sometimes have to be mapped to multiple encoders or inputs. The encoders themselves, much like the push buttons, feel intentionally stiff to use. You can really feel each turn of the encoder as it engages, allowing you to make quick adjustments with real precision. Each encoder has 12 individual positions, and you can choose between either incremental or position-based input. And this is really important as some sim titles don't work well with multi-position switches. When set to incremental mode, each left turn will simply activate a single in-game input, and each right turn will also activate a second input. There are also an additional 6 thumb encoders which are positioned around the faceplate. These are mounted 90 degrees to the main encoder, allows you to quickly make adjustments in-game without requiring you to remove your hand from the wheel. These encoders are slightly less stiff to activate than the front encoders, which is good as you'll have less strength in your thumb and it will require less effort. But much like the front encoders, they're still stiff enough to prevent you from scrolling too far and changing your in-game settings too much. These thumb encoders are ideal for making quick adjustments on the fly, such as your brake bias and differential settings, which can often be changed from corner to corner. A single change can be performed in under a second and requires very little movement to perform. It is worth noting that all encoders along with the push buttons are made of plastic though. Now, this doesn't affect how they perform or how they feel in the heat of a race, but the front encoders in particular do reduce the premium feel of the wheel a little bit. If the three front encoders simply had a strip of metal or even a rubberized textured grip, it would instantly increase the overall build quality. But once you're racing, as I mentioned, this has little to no impact whatsoever. Now, if you are a fan of flashy LED lights on your sim racing products, then this wheel is going to tickle your fancy. I spoke about the individual LED lights above each button, but there are also a series of individually lit Rev Lights and flag lights. Across the top of the wheel are 15 Rev Lights which can be fully customized. You can change the colour of each individual light, along with the timing and the rev pattern. You can choose for your Rev Lights to light up in batches, move from left to right, or go from the edge to the centre. There's an absolute ton of customization here to allow you to set the Rev Lights up exactly to your own preference. And just below these are 6 individual flag lights. These are fantastic while racing as they'll flash different colours depending on what's happening on track. If you pass through a yellow flag area, they'll light up yellow. They flash green at the start of a race and display a checkered flag when you approach the finish line. And if you do find these distracting or you just don't need certain flag light combinations, you can disable or enable whichever combination of lights you need. Moving around the back of the wheel, you'll find the shifters. As standard, you get 2 magnetic shifters included, but you'll see here that I've got the additional clutch and input paddles installed. These extra paddles are an additional purchase, but they're worth considering if you perform standing starts or would like some additional inputs. Personally, I use the 2 top paddles as DRS and EOS activations, as it requires very little hand movement and frees up some buttons on the front of the wheel. Both the main shifter paddles and the 2 input paddles above feature contactless magnetic activation, and they both feel great. Continuing the theme from the front facing inputs, the magnetic shifters feel firm to activate. I would personally have preferred the shifters to feel a little lighter, as after a long race you can feel a bit of fatigue in your hands. And I also think that the paddles could have been constructed from something other than plastic. The face of each paddle has this rather scratchy plastic material which just doesn't feel very premium. Looking at other wheels in this price range, you'll often find carbon fibre or metal paddles, and this approach would have been nice here. I'd imagine Asetek are holding their metal or carbon paddles for a more premium Invicta steering wheel if they do make one, but having the option to upgrade to metal paddles would be nice in the future. A nice part of the paddle design though is the small lip on the inside. This moulds your fingers nicely into the paddle and avoids any chance of your fingers slipping off during a shift. Another big plus on the design is just how quiet these shifters are. On the inside of the shifter, just beneath the magnet, is a small foam or fabric piece of insulation. This provides some noise dampening after each shift and prevents that loud clicking sound that is often found in magnetic paddles. Now the next thing I want to talk about is the quick release on this Forte wheel. And this is one area where Asetek have absolutely nailed the design and execution. The quick release itself rather resembles the one found on a SimuCube wheelbase. However, unlike that quick release, the one on the Forte wheel features a lever which allows you to disengage the quick release mechanism with a single hand. You simply pull the lever and the steering wheel will fall away from the wheelbase. This is so smooth and easy to do, you can do it with one hand, and if you're really feeling like you want to put in minimal effort, you can rotate the steering wheel 180 degrees and then pull the lever, and this will simply let the steering wheel drop into your hand. This all works by the 2 parts of the quick release interlocking as you lower the steering wheel onto the wheelbase. Then the quick release fully engages when you release the lever and it locks the wheel in place. Once mounted, there is literally zero movement or give between the steering wheel and wheelbase. This quick release has performed perfectly every time I've used the Forte wheel. It's quite honestly the best one I've used. The main downside of this approach though is the large lever on the top of the quick release itself. I touched on this earlier, but this lever can be seen while racing and it just looks a bit awkward and in the way. It doesn't help that the lever is finished in this shiny copper material, so your eyes are naturally drawn to it. This is one downside of what is an incredibly impressive quick release design. If Asetek could make this lever smaller or less intrusive while racing, it'd be absolute perfection. Now the ergonomics, much like any part of this Asetek wheel, are incredibly good. I've spoken about the performance of the buttons and other inputs while racing already, and just how easy things are to access, but I need to touch on the hand grips. These grips are designed to really allow your fingers and thumbs to mould around them, and they do just that. There are channels and grooves across where your thumb and fingers go, which make it very easy to keep a good grip on the wheel, even when used with the higher powered direct drive wheelbases that Asetek offer. I can't speak for everybody, but the hand grips are perfectly sized for my hands. I'd imagine those with larger thumbs may find the cutout channels a little uncomfy, but I do think Asetek offers some form of XL hand grip which can be installed for those with different grip preferences. I do also want to touch on the positioning of the clutch paddles, as during use I found them awkward to use. You'll see here that the shifter paddles are quite large and allow me to place all 4 fingers on each paddle if needed. However, this leads me to being out of position to press the clutch paddles with my 2 lower fingers. For me to activate either clutch, I have to completely move my hand position down the wheel and really extend my fingers. This is both uncomfortable and awkward. It would have been much better for the overall usability and ergonomics if the shifter paddles were a little smaller and the dual clutch paddles were slightly higher up. Now in terms of compatibility, there isn't too much to say at the moment. This Forte wheel works with all 3 wheelbases that Asetek currently offer, from the Prima up to the Invicta. Despite looking similar to the Simucube quick release, the Forte's quick release itself can't be used on a Simucube wheelbase. But who knows what will happen in the future with adapters and different ways of opening up compatibility. So with everything said and done, it leads me on to the question of whether you should consider this steering wheel and would I recommend it? Well, I have to say that I would certainly recommend it for those looking for a mid to high end steering wheel. There are certainly some areas where corners have been cut in order to keep the price down, such as the rather heavy use of plastic on the encoders and the lack of metal or carbon on the shifters. And I don't fully agree with some small design decisions, such as the large quick release lever, but in terms of raw performance, along with the sheer amount of inputs, the fantastic build quality, and the outstandingly easy to use quick release, the Asetek Forte Formula wheel gets a huge recommendation from me.